Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Good afternoon everyone and welcoming you to the session on analysis and impact of Safari retreat judgments. My name is Neha Chaudhary and I'm delighted to be your host for this important discussion on the far-reaching legal, financial and policy implications of.
Neha, there is some echo. Please check.
Before we begin, let's take a moment. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcoming you to the session on analysis and impact of Safari retreat judgments. My name is Neha Chaudhary, and I'm delighted to be your host for this important discussion on the far reaching legal, financial, and policy implications of these landmark judgments. Before we begin, let's take a moment to cover some housekeeping details. This session will be recorded, and you will watch it on our YouTube channel, Webtel Electrosoft, after the session. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat or QA section, and we will address them at the end during our QA session. Over the 2 decades, Webtel has been India's one of the leading e-compliance solution company, well known for its compliance management, office management, HR management solutions. We believe in delivering our best to clients through our expertise and dedicated professionalism. We have incorporated Knowledge Academy as well, where you can do all your learnings by opting for self-paced courses, staying in line with the blogs, and keeping pace with webinars and despite having a long story of providing simplified solutions to help our clients, communities, and network facing compliance challenges. We dare ourselves constantly to anticipate, plan, and execute in order to simplify the
Neha, we
ever-changing world
still
of
we are getting
compliance.
that problem. Try to close one of the devices. I think there are two devices on because of which there is an echo.
Our products and services have covered it all for your proficiencies in compliance, virtual, HRMS, SAP, company law, and outsourcing solutions. We have reached greater heights in providing legal and regulatory compliance management solutions, even in the KSA as a ZATCA approved vendor, and developed desktop based application with advanced facilities for e-filing, e-reporting, auto updating of laws, enterprises, resource planning, payroll, and etc. Today, we are presenting webinar on analysis and impact of Safari retreat judgments presented by CA Tushar Agarwal, Advocate Kabir Rishi, and CA Rajiv Khandelwal. Now, let me introduce you to our speakers of the day. Our today's first speaker is CA Tushar Agarwal. He is co-founder Tatvam Advisors. He has more than 10 years of experience in indirect tax. He has worked for more than 8 years with Lakshmi Kumaran and Sridharan attorneys. He was also deployed by Goods and Services Tax Network GSTN for GST implementation and has worked closely with government officials. He has worked extensively with the Government of India GST in designing GST returns, audit, and other formats. Our second speaker is Advocate Kabir Rishi. He is a lawyer with more than 11 experience in the field of indirect taxation and has worked extensively in the areas of GST, central excise, service tax, and customs. He had worked at the law firm Lakshmi Kumaran and Sridharan for more than 10 years in the indirect tax advisory team. He presently working in association with Tatvam Advisors on various indirect matters for around 1 year. He has advised various in Indian and multinational companies on a range of tax issues, including business restructuring, including merger, demerger, and acquisitions, area based exemptions, schemes, tax benefits, subsidies, incentives, impact of anti profiting under GST, and classification of products. He has many publications on a wide range of topics in indirect taxes to his name and has spoken in various seminars and webinars on issue pertaining to indirect taxation. Our moderator of the day is CA Rajiv Khandelwal. He is a fellow chartered accountant of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. He is also DISA ICAI, a certified system auditor. He is also an alumnus of Sri Ram College of Commerce, SRCC. He has over 3 decades of experience in compliance selector. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time to over Mr. Kabir Rishi. Sir, please.
Thanks, Neha, for the introduction. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'll be sharing my screen. Just give me a second. Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So, at the outset, I would like to thank Team Webtel for giving us the chance to take today's session on this important judgment of Safari Retreat. And I would also like to thank all the participants who are attending today's session. So, in this session, we would be discussing the background of this judgment Safari Retreat, and we would be analyzing the judgment in detail, wherein we will see that in this judgment, even though a lot of propositions have been given, but still there are a lot of unanswered issues which will have to be answered in the future. Maybe there might be second round of litigations also on this aspect. So we would be touching that in this webinar. Apart from that, we would be doing some sector-specific case studies, wherein we will see the impact of this judgment across different sectors. And we will also discuss the way forward regarding after this judgment as to what measures the taxpayers can take to optimize the availment of ITC. So this judgment of the Supreme Court emanates from the order of the Odisha High Court. In this case, the petitioner was engaged in the construction of malls, and the petitioner was leasing out the spaces inside the mall to various tenants. The petitioner intended to avail the ITC of various goods and services which were used in the construction of the malls, as it was discharging GST on the outward supply of renting of these outlets inside the mall. So the petitioner approached the High Court and it sought a declaration that the ITC under Section 17(5)(d) should be available to it, since it is engaged in the activity of renting of this outlets inside the mall. As an alternate argument, the petitioner also challenged the validity of Section 16(5)(d) of the CGST Act. So in the judgment of the Odisha High Court, the High Court read down the provisions of Section 17(5)(d), and it said that once the ITC is available in cases where the shops or the building is sold prior to getting the completion certificate, the renting of immovable property on which is the activity on which GST has to be paid. So it has to be seen in similarity to the activity wherein the shops are being sold before getting the completion certificate. And in these set of facts, the High Court said that the objective of GST law was to avoid cascading effect of taxes. So in case the ITC is disallowed in this case, it will defeat the objective of GST law. And accordingly, the ITC was allowed in this case. So one important point to note is that the finding which was given by the High Court, that would have been equally applicable in case of works contract services also, because they went by the objective of GST law and basis that the benefit was allowed. Now we would be looking into the judgment of the Supreme Court, how the Supreme Court has given the interpretation of Section 17(5)(d) of the CGST Act. So the relevant legal provisions for the purpose of this session are Section 17(5)(c) and Section 17(5)(d) of the CGST Act. Section 17(5)(c) provides that the ITC will not be available in respect of works contract services when supplied for construction of an immovable property other than plant and machinery. So, except where an input service is for further supply of works contract service. So, the provision section 17.5C is very clear. It says that the ITC will not be available if the works contract service is used for construction of immovable property. However, the exception being if it is for construction of plant and machinery immovable property, which is in the nature of plant and machinery, the ITC would be available. However, in section 16.5D, the words used are the ITC is not available in respect of goods or services or both received by a taxable person for construction of immovable property other than plant or machinery on his own account. So in this case, the ITC was specifically allowed in cases where the construction involved construction of an immovable property, which was in the nature of plant or machinery. So there's a explanation under section 17.5, which defines the term plant and machinery as an apparatus, equipment, and machinery fixed to earth by foundation or structural support and includes such foundation and structural support. However, there is a specific exclusion for land, building, or civil structure, including as well as telecommunication towers from the definition of plant and machinery. So, the Supreme Court in this matter of Safari Retreat was considering the provisions of section 17.5D only, wherein the ITC is not allowed on the goods and services which are used for construction of immovable property other than plant or machinery. So the questions which were framed before the Supreme Court were whether section 17.5C, section 17.5D, and section 16.4 of the CGST Act are unconstitutional or not. Other than that, the other questions were whether the definition of plant and machinery in explanation to section 17 would be applicable to the expression plant or machinery under section 17.5D. And the last question was, if the plant explanation is not applicable, what would be the meaning assigned to the term plant? As regards the constitutionality of section 17.5C, section 17.5D, it was held that these provisions cannot be said to be discriminatory. And accordingly, the ITC and accordingly, these provisions are constitutional. And the second point was regarding section 16.4 of the CGST Act, which provides a time limit regarding availment of ITC. As per section 16.4, the ITC has to be availed within the 30th November of the next financial year in respect of any goods and services received in a particular financial year. So this question regarding the constitutionality was also before the Supreme Court. And in this case, the court only gave a finding in one paragraph that nothing has been shown on record as to how the provision is arbitrary and discriminatory. Apart from that, regarding the time limit for availment of credit, no finding has been given by the Supreme Court in this case. So this matter regarding the time limit, the constitutional validity of the time limit is already pending before the Supreme Court in various other matters also, such as in the case of Shanti Motors. So in this case, since the only observation of the Supreme Court is that there was nothing shown by the appellant, as per my understanding, this matter can still go before the Supreme Court, even though they have given a judgment regarding section 16.4. It was only on the basis of whatever the petitioner or the respondent in this case had shown the court regarding the constitutionality of section 16.4. So in other cases, this matter can still be argued before the Supreme Court as per my understanding. So now coming to the judgment of Safari Retreat, what has actually been held, as we have seen section 17.5D, that provides that regarding the ITC availability on goods and services used in construction of immovable property. So the Supreme Court has noted in the judgment, specifically in para 32, that there are two exceptions in clause D to the exclusion from ITC provided in section 17.5D. The first exception is where the goods or service or both are received by a taxable person to construct an immovable property consisting of a plant or machinery. The second exception is where goods or services or both are received by a taxable person for the construction of an immovable property made not on his own account. So there are two independent exclusions from the clause section 17.5d, which the court has specifically observed in para 32 of the judgment. However, if we read the judgment in detail, see the other clauses, there might be a case to say that the Supreme Court has actually said that these two conditions have to be seen, has to be satisfied simultaneously. So we will be discussing all these things in the subsequent slides. So as regards the meaning of on his own account in para 32 of the judgment, the court has categorically held that on his own account include immovable property being used for personal purpose rather than for taxable supplies. And the second thing they have said is that the immovable property being used as a setup for carrying out business. So now if the immovable property is being used as a setup for carrying out business, say for an office space which is constructed by the person availing the ITC, or a factory, even a factory building. So these buildings are constructed for carrying out the own business. So the court has said that on its own account, as mentioned in section 17.5d, will also include cases where the factory or the office building is being constructed for the on the account of the person availing the ITC. However, in the same para, they have said that the term on its own account will not include immovable property constructed for the purpose of sale or lease or license. As we have seen in the facts of the case was mainly pertaining to the situation where the petitioner was availing ITC on construction of mall, which was further given by it on lease. So if we see this para 32 in isolation in the entire judgment, then if I'm giving any property on lease, then it would not be construction on my own account. So if we read this para in isolation, in our case itself, the ITC should have been allowed since the mall was being constructed for giving further where the retail outlets were further given on lease. So as per me, if we read this para 32, the case might have ended here only. And basis this para 32, the benefit should have been allowed to the assessee. But in this case, as we said, we have seen that there are two exceptions to this clause 17.5d. The first being where the immovable property in question is in the nature of plant or machinery. So the court has further dwelled into the meaning of plant or machinery, plant in the judgment in great detail. So this was only a para in the judgment where they have given a favorable finding in respect of the petitioner, and which would be applicable in various other cases also. But the end judgment is not only based on this finding, which was given in para 32. In the judgment, the court has delved into the issue of plant, the meaning of plant and machinery versus the expression plant or machinery, which is mentioned in section 17.5d. So as we have seen earlier, the definition which is given under the explanation to section 17.5 is only for the expression plant and machinery. However, in this case, while looking into the meaning of plant or machinery, the court has said that the term plant or machinery has to be construed separately from plant and machinery. The department specifically raised a point that the words they intended to use were plant and machinery only, and the words or machinery have been used because of a drafting error. But in this judgment, the court observed that the expression plant has been and machinery has been used multiple times in various chapters, more than 10 times in different chapters of the CGST Act. Further, they also observed that the draft law has used the expression plant and machinery in section 17.5d, and there was a conscious change to plant or machinery in section 17.5d when the final GST Act was passed. Further, the court also observed that if there was a drafting error in this case, and the judgment was passed 6 years back, the judgment of the Odisha High Court was passed 6 years back, the court could have actually, the legislature could have actually made the amendment in the provision and could have changed it to plant and machinery, but that was not done. So it was held that the expression, the meaning which is assigned to the term plant and machinery would not be applicable to the the expression plant or machinery under section 17(5)(d). Then the question which arose before the court was if the meaning has not to of plant and machinery does not has to be assigned to this expression plant or machinery, then how it has to be construed. So since the term plant was actually not defined in the CGST Act, the court has held that the meaning of the term plant has to be construed in the ordinary trade parlance. Then the court relied on various earlier Supreme Court judgments, specifically in income tax law, wherein the courts have applied functionality tests to examine whether a building qualifies as a plant or not. In para 52 of this Safari Retreat judgment, there is a specific finding that where a building is a plant, whether a building is a plant or not is a question of fact. The court has earlier held that if it is found on facts that a building has been so planned and constructed as to serve a assessee special technical requirement, it will have to be treated as a plant. So in para 52, they have said that the building itself should be constructed in a manner that it should serve certain specific technical requirements of the assessee. Then only it can be regarded as a plant as per para 52. If we see the other paragraphs of the judgment, then in para 65C, which is the conclusion of the judgment, here also the court has dwelled on the functionality test. In para 65C, the court has said the question whether any building other than hotel or a cinema can be classified as a plant used in section 17(5)(d) has to be determined keeping in mind the business of the registered person, the role of the building, with the role that building plays in the business, and if the construction of the building was essential for carrying out the activity of supplying service, such as renting or giving it on lease or other transactions, the building could be held to be a plant. So if we read para 52 and para 65C of the judgment, it can be seen that there are two tests which have been actually laid down by the court. In para 52, they are talking about the functional requirement that the building should have certain specific technical features. If I see para 65C, it is more talking about the essentiality of the business of the building in the business of supply of service. So actually, there are two tests which have been propounded by the court in this judgment. So one is the essentiality test, the other is the functionality test. And basis these tests, in para 56, the court has said that each and every building is different. And there should be a fact-finding inquiry in respect of each building. And this matter of Safari Retreat has been remanded by the Supreme Court to the High Court to examine on facts as to whether the mall in question satisfies the functionality test. So, and the court has also made a finding that the functionality test, this specific portion of the judgment, that in this specific portion of the judgment, that this will also be applicable to warehouses or other buildings other than hotels and cinema theaters. So regarding the hotels and cinema theaters, we'll see in the further slides as to why this finding was made. But apart from malls also, this judgment is applicable to warehouses and other buildings also. So as long as the functionality test is satisfied, the ITC should be available. So now there are two operative paras of the judgment. One is para 32, wherein they have given the meaning of the term on its own account, wherein they have said that if the property is being rented, the ITC should be allowed. But in the conclusion of the judgment, if we see para 65C, wherein they have talked about the eligibility of the credit, there is no reference to the clause or the finding given regarding on its own account. In this para, the only emphasis is regarding the functionality test. And as we have discussed earlier, basis the facts of the case, the court should have allowed the benefit as per para 32 to the assessee, even without going into all these parameters of functionality test, if I apply only para 32. So it seems that in order to avail the credit, even though para 32 parameters regarding on its own account are being satisfied, still the intention of the court in this judgment, it seems to be that still the functionality test has to be satisfied. Definitely, we can, in different cases, we can use para 32, the findings in para 32 regarding on its own account to argue that the ITC will be available. But again, it would be again subject to judicial scrutiny as to whether the ITC can be availed only on the basis of the findings in para 32 regarding on its own account. As regards the functionality test, so the crux of the judgment is that you have to apply the functionality test for each and every building in order to avail the ITC in the future. So in this judgment, the courts have not laid down specific criteria which has to be satisfied, but we have relied on various earlier judgments of Supreme Court and other high courts wherein the functionality test was deliberated upon by the courts, and basis that in some cases the benefit has been allowed. So as I referred to in the earlier discussion, that this judgment is not applicable to hotel and cinema theaters. In this regard, there is one earlier judgment of Anand Theatres of the Supreme Court itself, which was regarding income tax, and under income tax, separate rates of depreciation were available for plants as well as buildings. So the question was whether the depreciation in respect of the hotel building can be claimed in under the head of plant. So in this case, the court held that merely due to the fact that some additional features are there in the hotel building, no additional benefit should be available as compared to a simple hotel building having no additional features. So in this case, the court categorically held that the hotel and cinema theater buildings do not qualify as plants, and they compared the fact that for simple buildings wherein there are no additional features, for those buildings also, the benefit in respect of depreciation should not be given as compared to the hotels with no such features. So this judgment of Anand Theatre was again considered by the larger bench of the Supreme Court in the case of Karnataka Power Corporation. In this case, the building in question was a hydropower generating station building, and various power generation equipment were housed inside the building. So in this case, the court gave a finding that the judgment of Anand Theatres is only restricted to hotel and cinema theatres. And the court applied the functionality test in respect of this hydropower generating station building, and held that where a building has been so planned and constructed to serve an SSC specific technical requirement, it will be regarded as a plant. So in this judgment, a benefit has been provided in respect of the buildings wherein the construction has been made as per the SSC's special technical requirement. And this is the main judgment which has been relied in Safari Retreat also. Apart from that, we would be covering certain other examples of buildings which have been again deliberated by other courts. So one is this judgment of Kanodia cold storage in the matter of Allahabad High Court, wherein the building which was used as a freezing chamber, and which the building itself contained some insulation material like cork, etc., to keep the appropriate temperature inside the freezing chamber, then the building was held to be a plant because it had certain additional technical features. Similarly, in case of a nursing home also, which was equipped with operation theater and sterilization room, the beneficial judgment was given by the Supreme Court saying that the nursing home had certain specific specifications and the building was designed for a particular purpose only, and then it should be regarded as a plant only. In the case of Madras Cement Limited, the question was regarding the whether the reinforced concrete foundation for the purpose of installing the rotary kiln inside the factory. So inside the factory also, if there are some specific modifications or specifications by which the building is designed, in this case, the court gave the benefit in respect of the foundation of the rotary kiln and said that it should be held as a plant. Similarly, in the case of Coltex oil refining, the Bombay High Court, the issue was regarding whether the fence covering the refinery would be regarded as a plant or not. In this case, the court observed that there were certain legal requirements under the petroleum rules, which obligated that the area where the refining of petrol is carried out should be covered by a wall or fence. So basis the legal requirement, the court held that this fencing was part of the processing unit itself, and it would fall under the expression plant. This is an interesting judgment in the case of RC Chemical Industries, Delhi High Court. Again, this is a negative judgment which was given by the court regarding the functionality test. So in this case, the factory building was used for the manufacture of saccharine and other chemicals. And it was argued that the building was constructed with particular specification and standards. And it had certain atmospheric controls, etc., which were required for manufacturing saccharine. However, the court observed that other companies were also manufacturing saccharine in normal buildings wherein such features were not there. So in this case, the court held that merely because manufacture would be better carried out in a building would not convert the building from a setting to a plant. So in this case, while applying the functionality test, the court held that it has to be seen whether particular features incorporated in the building in question were essential to the manufacturing process and the functioning of the equipment or not. So if we see these judgments, the overarching principle which we can see is that every shelter or structure is not a plant. What the court have continuously held in various judgments is that if there are certain specific design or specifications which are there in the building, which are required for the functioning of the factory or the building itself, then only it can be regarded as a plant. So one such example was also in the case of RG Ispat Limited, where the factory building was used for the manufacturing of grinding balls and ingots. So in this case, it was contended that the factory structures have heavy steel structures with deep, wide, ready-made concrete foundations forming integral parts of the plant. And it was also argued that the structures were designed to take heavy load of cranes, which handle the hefty ladders inside the factory. In these set of facts, the court allowed the benefit in respect of the building as a plant, but only to the extent the structure was required to make the cranes operative. And for the extra structure, it was specifically held that the same could not be regarded as a plant. So again, in the judgment, the Safari Retreat judgment, as I said earlier, there are no specific criteria which were laid down as to how the functionality test has to be applied. So these are some of the illustrative cases wherein the question whether the specific building is a plant or not has been considered by the courts. And again, after the judgment of the Supreme Court in Safari Retreat, the matter regarding functionality test will have to be examined qua the GST law also. And again, recourse of these judgments will have to be taken in the future for getting the benefit. So this is regarding the judgment. Now we would be discussing the specific impact of the judgment in various sectors, and Tushar will be taking this part. Tushar, I am stopping my screen share. You can share your screen.
Tusharji, before you begin, this latest judgment of Safari regarding that and so many other cases also Kabirji told us about. So what is there in this particular case that it has ignited so much of interest, and we are specifically having specific seminars for this and everything. So what is so different about this case? If you could throw some light on that.
Okay. Sir, before this case, the general perception amongst the taxpayers was that whenever I am constructing my building, the credit is not available. So after the GST was implemented, if I'm using my building for my CA work, or I'm constructing factory building, or I'm constructing building for rental purposes, generally the perception amongst everyone was that the credit is not available. It's only when the Odisha High Court came and thereafter they said that in case of renting of immovable property services, if you are constructing a building and renting it out, the credit would be available. And now this Supreme Court judgment in detail has given a ratio, or rather have given the principles to decide when CRADE will be available in respect of construction of a building. In what all scenarios you can avail the credit in respect of construction of building. So that's why there has been lots of discussion, lots of webinars, seminars on this particular issue, because this
Right.
issue of construction of credit on construction of building has a larger impact on every kind of taxpayer, be it a small taxpayer, be it a chartered accountant, be a manufacturer, or any service, any industry. That's why it has
Right.
gained lots of attention. It's on construction of building.
Right. Thank you.
And thanks, Kabir, for discussing this judgment in detail and also analyzing the functionality test and various kinds of income tax judgment and jurisprudence on this issue. After discussing this judgment, let us practically implement the ratio of this judgment on our live cases and analyze the sector-wise impact of this judgment. The first example is I'm constructing a building for renting it out. Say it may be an office building for renting out office spaces. It may be a mall which I am constructing, which was effectively the case in Odisha High Court for renting it out. I rent out the shops, etc. Whenever I construct a building, there are various kinds of construction activity which is undertaken. First is the civil work, the structure which I construct. Then there are interiors like tiling, flooring, etc. Then there is a requirement of plant and machinery which is installed. Plant and machinery means lift which is installed, HVAC system, the entire AC system, fire extinguisher, and so many other plant and machineries which are installed during the construction of building. And third element is the movable items which are there. It may be chairs, tables, etc., lights, etc., which are movable, which can be detached. As far as credit related to plant and machinery is concerned, that is lifts, HVAC system, firefighting systems, or movable items is concerned, in our view, the credit was always available in cases where you were constructing offices for renting it out. So credit related to HVAC, lift, etc., movable item, etc., was always available as per the law. It's only that there were certain ground level advanced rulings and in fact certain negative advanced ruling. That's why departmental authorities used to create issues at the ground level. But legally, going by the provision, the credit was always available. The real challenge was the credit on the civil part, the civil construction part, the interiors part, whether that credit is available or not. Very important ratio and very important. This is the one of the most important part what we are discussing right now. The entire judgment of Safari Retreat is analyzing the provision of section 17(5)(d), which uses the word goods or services or both received by a taxable person for construction of immovable property. As far as 17(5)(c) is concerned, 17(5)(c) specifically covers works contract services when supplied for construction of an immovable property. So when I'm constructing, I'm doing a civil work, there can be two ways of executing an agreement with the contractor. One way is that I purchase goods separately. I purchase services separately. I purchase steel, cement, RMC, etc. separately. It's a purchase of goods. And I give a labor contract to somebody for construction of the building. So all those scenarios will be covered under section 17(5)(d), and accordingly Safari Retreat will be applicable. We will just discuss the ground level implication. However, if I'm giving a end-to-end turnkey contract to somebody involving both goods and services, you construct my entire civil structure. Say, hey, Larsen and Toubro, come do my construction of this entire civil structure. It's a works contract, goods services, your responsibility. The judgment is not applicable on 17(5)(c). Please read 17(5)(c) specifically cover plant and machinery, whereas 17(5)(d) covers plant or machinery. The functionality test to check whether a building can be a plant will be applicable only in respects of credit which is coming under 17(5)(d) and not 17(5)(c). So if you are availing any works contract credit, that is not covered by the judgment of Safari Retreat. It's a very important point to be noted that works contract services availed from the contractors, availed from the vendors are not covered directly under this judgment. This judgment is squarely analyzing the provision of section 17(5)(d) because there the words used were plant or machinery, and in C it is plant and machinery. And also the argument of own account, that my building is not on my own account, is used again in 17(5)(d) and not 17(5)(c). So this judgment is not applicable on works contract services directly. And that's why we are advising all our clients, like in respect of all future construction, let's not enter into works contract. It's better to split the contract for supply of goods and supply of services. Independently purchase your goods, independently purchase your services. Steel, cement, iron, etc. has to be independently purchased. That's an important structuring of agreement that has to be done. If I avail works contract services, I will directly fall under 17.5C. I will not be covered under 17.5D, and accordingly, the benefit of Safari retreat judgment will not be available to me. So that is one of the important point which we have to keep in mind before we discuss the sector-wise implication. Now, with this in background, and let's understand whether I will be eligible to take credit of goods or services which are independently procured in respect of construction of a building, that is civil work, interiors work, and building which is rented out. The Supreme Court in para 32 has said that if you are constructing the building for rental purposes or for sale purposes, in such a situation, it will not be deemed to be on own account. So the first ground to avail the credit is that since I am constructing this building for rental purposes, for lease purposes, for license purposes, it cannot be said to be a construction of building on my own account. It is not for my personal account. It is not for my own account. And basis para 32 of the Safari retreat judgment, there is a good possibility to argue that credit should be available. Apart from this argument, the second argument which we can take is that if my building satisfies the functionality test, it will qualify as planned, and accordingly, I will not be covered under the exclusion of 17.5D. So these are two different arguments. Though the first argument of own account was given only in one paragraph of 32, whereas all the rest paragraphs were related to the functionality test and when a building will qualify as a plant, whereas this larger argument of that my building when given on rent is not on own account is restricted in one para of the Supreme Court judgment. Doubts have been created that whether these two arguments has to be satisfied simultaneously or it has to be satisfied independently. If I satisfy any of this one argument, that is, if I satisfy that it is for rental purposes, para 32 say not on own account, credit available, 17.5D not hit. I'm not required to check whether my building is a plant or machinery or not. In such a situation, to my mind, this is a possible argument, though the entire judgment revolves around the functionality test when a building will qualify as a plant, but para 32 to our mind can be read independently, and we can take the benefit of para 32 to say that as far as my output is of renting of immovable property, credit should be available to me irrespective of the fact that building is not a plant. That is a possible argument which we should take. Apart from that, very important paragraph in 56 of the judgment, each mall is different, each building is different. You have to see whether a particular building will qualify as a plant or not. They specifically use the word each mall is different. So as a layman, when we see different malls, we always find that all malls are same. So how can malls can be different? It's not like factory. And factory, we understand there can be so many permutation combination. But when we talk about office buildings, when we talk about malls, etc., as a layman, all malls seems to be same. After analyzing all those income tax judgments, the best possible functionality test which we are able to carve out can be that when a building is constructed, how I have designed this particular building, how my parking spaces are there, how my evacuation routes are there, emergency exit are there, how wide my corridors are there, how the demarcation has been done. To my mind, these can be some of the functionality tests which we can show to demonstrate that my building is a plant. But ultimately, the matter has been remanded back to the High Court, and it is for the High Court to decide when this functionality test in respect of building which is rented out will be satisfied. To conclude, in respect of leasing or renting of office spaces, own account argument is a very good argument. Apart from that, functionality test is something which is yet to be tested in court of law when a particular building will be said to be planned, and these can be some of the parameters which we can use to satisfy. For future, whenever I'm doing a construction of a building for renting purposes or leasing purposes, it is our opinion that the taxpayer should avail the credit. It is a good case to argue that credit should be available for the past period. If my time limit has lapsed, section 16(4) time limit has lapsed, I will not be in a position to avail the credit. However, in case where I have availed the credit and reversed it, then I can reclaim. We can take a stand that at the time of reclaim of credit, the time limit of section 16(4) is not applicable. Now, for the past, what we have seen is that many a times, whatever construction has been done by the real estate players or other taxpayers, they have given the works contract to the contractor. Whatever we are discussing is for 17(5)(d) and not 17(5)(c). Works contract is specifically barred under 17(5)(c). So the credit of 17(5)(c) is not available. In such a situation, our advice is that this interpretation, though Supreme Court entire judgment is on 17(5)(d), but effectively, if I procure goods and services separately, credit is available. And we can argue that it is not on account. But I am availing works contract services and not allowing the credit is giving an absurd result. So for works contract services, it is advised that for the past period, better avail the credit and reverse under protest. So that down the line, if some more clarity comes from High Court, thereafter, we can take a decision to re-avail the credit. Section 16(4) time limit is not applicable wherever I avail the credit and reverse it and thereafter re-avail it. So we can use that provision, or we can take the credit and not utilize till the time certainty is there. Moving on to the next set of example, that is co-working space of warehouses. So whatever we discussed for leasing purposes, similarly for co-working spaces also the same is applicable because nature of work is same. In co-working also I'm renting out my fixed seats to my customers, etc. So my output is more of a rental and nature or lease rental or license or leasing nature. Accordingly, the same principles what we discussed for construction of property for rental purposes will be applicable for co-working also. Coming to warehouses, there can be two ways a warehouse operates. One way is that a warehouse is giving a dedicated space to the customer. Since they are giving a dedicated earmarked space to the customer, in such a situation, the same principle will follow. My output is more of a renting services apart from warehousing services. So there is a big element, a main element of rental of a specific space along with warehousing services. If a particular area is earmarked and specifically demarcated for the customer, the same principle should follow what we discussed. However, if I'm only providing storage and warehousing services, a particular area is not earmarked. I'm just storing his goods, providing him storage and warehousing services. Then my output is not in the nature of rental services. My output is in the nature of storage and warehousing services. Once it is in the nature of storage and warehousing services, I cannot take the argument of own account. To get the credit, I have to take either of the argument. Either I satisfy it is not on my own account, or I satisfy that my warehouse is a plant. Own account argument is not available for storage or warehousing services. As per para 32 of the judgment, this argument is available only if my output is sale of building or rental of building. In case of storage and warehousing, this own account argument will not be available. And then I have to come to the second argument and satisfy that my warehouse is a plant for which I have to satisfy the functionality test. That is, there are certain specific technical requirement which has been inbuilt in the warehouse, say warehouses atmospherically, climatically controlled. The temperature will not go beyond this. This is the way a warehouse is constructed. There are mechanized warehouses with robotics can be established. So there have to be certain specific technical parameters that I'm not merely constructing the building for housing purposes. My construction element per se involves certain technical aspects which has to be satisfied. The functionality test, the functionality principle, which Kabir discussed in various judgments. So until and unless I satisfy that, credit will not be available. So the only argument for availing the credit is to satisfy the functionality test. With regard to hotels and cinema, I think it's clear and reaffirmed by the Supreme Court in Safari Retreat that construction credit will not be available. The benefit of this judgment will not be available for hotels and cinema halls until and unless the judgment of Anand Theatres or Safari Retreat is challenged in future. Again, friends, please note, when we are talking about the fact that credit is not available, we are talking about the civil work and the interior work. In any case, the credit pertaining to plant and machinery and movable item is available for hotels and cinema hall also. So it's only the civil work and the interiors works which we are talking about. Coming to the construction of factory, manufacturing units. Again, the argument of own account is not available as far as construction of factory or manufacturing unit is concerned. The only argument which is available is that whether my factory is a plant, whether my factory building is a plant or not, for which I have to again satisfy the functionality test. If I'm constructing the factory building merely for housing the machinery, it will not satisfy. My process of construction should involve, and there should be certain technical parameters which should be there in the construction of this building to prove that this construction of building is an essential activity for carrying out the business activity of manufacturing. For example, I am constructing a building where it requires heavy structures so that the cranes can work on this building. Cranes require support of tons of huge weight, and my building structure should be constructed and my foundation should be constructed in such a manner that I'm able to accommodate these cranes, I'm able to accommodate this high-end furnaces, plant and machinery. So my construction element should involve certain technical parameters which are essential for carrying out this manufacturing activity. My construction parameters should not be merely for housing purposes. It should be over and above, involving certain functionality tests as discussed by Kabir. Another important and very important aspect in respect of credit of telecommunication towers. Friends, a plant and machinery definition is there under the GST law, wherein there is a specific exclusion that telecommunication tower will not be covered under plant and machinery, but that is for plant and machinery. Whereas under 17(5)(d), the word used is plant or machinery, and for plant, the Supreme Court has laid down the functionality test. It is not going by the definition which is there under the GST law. So this exclusion under the definition of plant and machinery of telecommunication tower will not be applicable for 17(5)(d). If I am purchasing tower independently and I am covered under 17(5)(d), and if I satisfy the functionality test, that is my tower is being used for providing the output services. Now tower is directly linked with the provisioning of my output services. The way a tower is constructed at a particular height, wherein antennas and other equipments can be placed so as to enable the transmission of signals, etc. All these arguments can be used to substantiate that tower is effectively a plant under 17(5)(d). So those arguments can be explored for telecommunication tower industry. So this judgment has a huge impact. To conclude, whatever we have said till now, as far as my output activities of renting of immovable property, co-working space, or warehousing with a dedicated space which is earmarked, in such a situation, I have two arguments available. One is it is not on account of own account. Second, functionality test I have to satisfy. Whereas in all other cases like factory building, telecommunication tower, etc., own account argument is not available. I have to satisfy the definition of plant. I have to satisfy how my building is satisfying the functionality test as well as the essentiality test based on the parameters discussed. Similarly, we will have implications in respect of ports, airports. So this judgment will have impact on various kinds of immovable properties being constructed based on the principles which we have discussed. Moving forward, one of the basic issue which is again and again being discussed everywhere is that whether the government will come out with a retrospective amendment. They will amend it retrospectively, make plant and machinery under 17(5)(d) instead of plant or machinery. So for this, we all will have to wait. But effectively, if we see the intent of generally the policy wing, etc., which they have been sharing in public forum, government intent is always have been to achieve, say, 11 to 12% of the GDP as their indirect tax collection. And in last 1 year, we have almost collected 20 lakhs of GST, out of which 3-4 lakhs is from ITC and the rest is in cash only. The longer objective of government is to keep on improving and decreasing this negative list under 17(5) and expanding the output base, maybe like ATF, etc., which is always on discussion. So there are chances that government may take this judgment positively, and considering the objective of the GST law, which is to avoid cascading effect, ensures free flow of input tax credit, may not come out with this retrospective amendment. And even if they come out, there are chances, there are grounds to challenge this retrospective amendment. So we have to wait and see what will be the next course of action from the government. And as far as taxpayers is concerned, to our mind, this judgment should be given full impact and should be read in the context of enabling the taxpayers to get maximum credit, ensuring the objective of the GST, that is free flow of credit. So wherever there is a good case, wherever I'm able to satisfy the functionality test, in such a situation, I should definitely avail the credit. I should definitely utilize the credit. Wherever in a scenario I feel this functionality test, whether I will be in a position to satisfy or not, we are not in a position to come to a conclusion. In such a situation, our advice would be better avail the credit, need not utilize it. There is no interest, no penalty in case I avail the credit and not utilize, or I avail the credit and reverse under protest with the right to reclaim it in future. I should not forego my right to avail the credit wherever possible, wherever I'm in a position to get covered under this particular judgment ratio. The third important part for the past period is that if I have not availed the credit till now, I can avail the credit only for the financial year 23-24 and thereafter. For the past, the time limit has lapsed. Only in a scenario where you had availed the credit and reversed, you can re-avail the credit now. And for all my future contracts, for all civil work contracts, please bifurcate goods and services contracts. Don't give works contract. Works contract is not covered under 17.5D. It is covered under 17.5C. We may take an aggressive argument that works contract is also covered under 17.5D. Since I am out of 17.5D, I will be also out of 17.5C. But 17.5C being a specific clause for works contract, these arguments are very prone to litigation. So for future, it is our advice that goods and services contract should be split for construction of civil work and interior work. Friends, there will be many other judgments which will follow over the period of time. The Supreme Court has in fact remanded back the judgment to Odisha High Court, and now all the high courts in various states will keep on deciding and coming out with various ratios based on the principles given in this judgment. So our advice would be we should not lose our opportunity to avail the credit wherever we feel the call is disputable. Better avail, don't utilize, or avail and reverse under protest with the right to de-avail in future. With this, we end our presentation, and now we will be taking up the question and answer. If you have any questions,
If anybody wants to ask questions, you can raise your hands. I think one hand is raised. Manish Gupta.
so in fact,
Akash, can you unmute the people who want to ask questions?
Yes, sir. Manish Gupta ji, you can unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
so one of the question in the chat box is whether this judgment applies to repairs of building. So repairs of building, there can be two scenarios. One, you are capitalizing. Second, you are claiming it as a revenue expenditure. Where it is claimed as a revenue expenditure, credit was always available. But wherever you are capitalizing, the same principle will be applicable as what we discussed in this entire presentation. In fact, I have one question for you, Kabir. Practically, like a very simple example of renting of immovable property. Now, as we discussed, like in case of factory building, argument of own account is not available, and then we have to satisfy that there should be some specific technical features and parameters in the construction element and how it is linked with my output and manufacturing activity. Now, instead of getting into all this dispute, if I actually construct building in my one entity and rent it out to my manufacturing entity, or I am a chartered accountant, I have my own office. If I construct my own office in my legal firm, there is one implication. Now, individually, I take the property in my individual name, construct the building, and rent it out to my CA firm. If I explore and restructure my contracts to make it my output activity is rental, how strong is my case to avail the credit?
Definitely,
Is it
as per-
legally allowed or not?
Legally, it is allowed. So you can have any arrangement which you want. So legally, definitely that is allowed. And the ITC should be available as per para 32 of the judgment. If I again read para 32 only, but this Supreme Court judgment, they have went beyond para 32 also. So again, even if there is para 32, still if they were going to give the benefit on the basis of para 32 only, they need not have gone into the considering the facts of the case into the functionality test at all in this judgment. But since they have gone there, definitely at this stage, as per para 32, my advice would be that you can avail the credit. But that might be subject to dispute by the department. And maybe this para that some review petition, etc., can also be filed before the Supreme Court regarding the meaning of this para 32 as to if this condition is being satisfied, then the ITC should be available.
So if in fact till the time any progress is there, as of now, I can structure my agreements in a manner that I'm renting
Definitely
out.
you
Output
should.
is rental. So if my output is rental, it's a much better case than.
Again, the practical feasibility will have to be seen, but if it can be done, definitely people should explore this option.
I think Rajiv ji, we have I think covered all the whatever questions are there in the chat box.
Okay, so anybody else want to ask any question? Otherwise, we'll bring the session to an end.
So what
Okay,
we will do
Akash,
is that we will just drop our email ID also. So if
Right.
anybody has any particular question, they can mail Webtel team or on our particular email ID.
So now we can conclude the session.
Yes, sir. Thank you all for taking the time to be here today. I would especially like to thank our speaker, Mr. Tushar Agarwalji and Kabirji, for such an insightful session. If you have joined late or missed any important information, you can watch the repeat of this session on our YouTube channel and even check out our previously conducted webinars. For any doubts and queries, please scan this QR code and get them clarified or drop us mail on akash.kumar@webtel.co.in. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
हाँ संजय
Thank you.
Thank you.
हम्म नहीं 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 नहीं, आप सारा कुछ दे दो, मैं डायरेक्टर रिपोर्ट वगैरह भी ठीक कर देता हूँ।